He told himself the invitation meant nothing. Just a gesture. Just closure. Yet the moment Thomas Reed pressed send, his pulse betrayed him. Snow glazed the streets below his penthouse, turning the city into a quiet illusion of peace. At 48, Thomas had everything people admired: an empire built from grit, headlines praising his success, a calendar full of events that proved he was moving on. That was the story he sold the world. And this Christmas invitation to his ex-wife was meant to seal it. Proof that the past no longer had a grip on him. Their marriage had ended without drama, without noise. That silence had been the loudest thing of all. No fights, no accusations. Just a mutual realization that love had been slowly buried under ambition and patience. Audrey had walked away with grace, leaving behind a life that looked perfect from the outside. Thomas never stopped to ask what it had cost her. When her reply arrived, "I'll be there. Thank you for inviting me," he read it again and again, searching for emotion between the words. There was none. That unsettled him more than anger ever could. Christmas Eve arrived wrapped in tradition. Laughter filled his childhood home, familiar voices echoing through halls decorated with memories. Thomas played his role flawlessly, confident, charming, untouched by regret. He told himself this night would be easy. A smile, polite conversation, nothing more. Then the door opened. The room seemed to inhale and forget how to breathe. Audrey stood there, calm and radiant, but she wasn't alone. In her arms, bundled against the winter air, slept a tiny life Thomas hadn't prepared himself to face. Baby. Peaceful. Real. In that instant, the success he wore like armor cracked. The invitation had never been about showing he moved on. It had been a lie he needed to believe. And now, standing frozen beneath the Christmas lights, Thomas realized this night was about to change everything he thought he understood about love, loss, and the courage to begin again. Time didn't stop, but it twisted. Thomas felt it in the way the room suddenly sounded distant, as if he were underwater. Conversations blurred into soft echoes while his attention fixed on the child sleeping in Audrey's arms. The baby shifted slightly, a tiny hand escaping the blanket, fingers curling as if holding onto something unseen. That small movement carried more weight than any headline Thomas had ever earned. Audrey met his gaze, steady and unguarded. There was no hesitation in her eyes. No apology. Only calm certainty. That unsettled him more than shock ever could. This wasn't a surprise meant to hurt him. This was a life she had fully stepped into. His family reacted with warmth before questions could form. Admiration replaced confusion. Laughter returned, softer now, layered with wonder. Thomas watched it all unfold as though he were a guest in his own memory. He noticed how naturally Audrey moved, how instinctively she adjusted the blanket, how motherhood seemed to fit her in a way nothing ever had before. Someone asked about the child's name. Audrey answered gently. Someone commented on how peaceful the baby was. Audrey smiled, the kind of smile that comes from long nights and quiet victories no one else sees. Each response revealed a depth Thomas had never known how to reach. At dinner, he sat across from her, pretending to listen while studying the way she balanced conversation and care with effortless grace. She looked lighter. Not freer from responsibility, but freer within it. And that realization stung. Because it forced Thomas to confront a truth he had long avoided. She hadn't lost herself after leaving him. She had found herself. When the baby stirred, Audrey rose without drama, murmuring softly as she stepped away. Thomas watched her go, a hollow forming where his certainty once lived. He had measured progress in numbers and milestones. She had measured it in presence. For the first time since the divorce, Thomas felt something deeper than regret. It wasn't jealousy. It was awakening. The quiet understanding that moving on wasn't about success or appearances, or proving anything at all. It was about becoming honest with who you had been, and brave enough to face who you still needed to become. The house settled into a softer rhythm as the evening deepened, but Thomas's thoughts refused to quiet. Every laugh felt delayed, every compliment distant. He kept replaying the image of Audrey with the baby, as if his mind were trying to solve a puzzle that had no missing pieces, only truths he had ignored. He found her later in a quiet room, the fire glowing low, shadows dancing across shelves lined with old family books. Audrey sat near the window, gently rocking the baby, her movements unhurried, confident. The child's eyes were open now, curious and alert, studying the world with fearless honesty. Thomas hesitated before stepping inside, unsure of his place in this moment. "I didn't know," he said finally, the words sounding smaller than he intended. Audrey looked up, meeting him without tension. "You didn't ask," she replied softly. There was no blame in her voice, only clarity. She spoke of choice, how she had learned that waiting for the right time often meant waiting forever. She spoke of rebuilding herself quietly, away from expectations, away from being the one who always adjusted. Thomas listened, truly listened for the first time in years. He realized how often he had mistaken silence for contentment, accommodation for happiness. Audrey hadn't wanted less from life, she had wanted her life back. The baby made a small sound and Audrey smiled instinctively. Thomas noticed how that smile reached her eyes, how it stayed there even after she looked away. It wasn't joy that needed validation. It simply existed. Something shifted inside him then. Not regret sharp enough to wound, but awareness deep enough to change him. He had built towers of achievement without learning how to stay present inside them. As he left the room, Thomas understood that success without connection was just another kind of loneliness. And tonight, surrounded by everything he once chased, he was finally beginning to see what truly mattered. Sleep never came easily that night. Long after the house grew quiet, Thomas lay awake listening to the distant ticking of a clock he'd known since childhood. Every sound felt louder in the stillness, as if the walls themselves were waiting for him to understand something he'd avoided for years. He realized that this discomfort wasn't new, it had simply been easier to drown it in work. Morning arrived wrapped in pale winter light. Downstairs, the scent of coffee and warm bread filled the kitchen. Audrey stood near the counter, the baby nestled against her shoulder, humming softly. The scene felt ordinary and that was what made it powerful. No performance. No audience. Just presence. Thomas watched from the doorway before speaking. He noticed how his mother's voice softened around Audrey, how his sister laughed more freely, how the baby seemed to anchor the room in calm. Audrey belonged here not as someone reclaiming the past, but as someone fully rooted in the present. Later, Thomas found himself outside, breath visible in the cold air, staring at the snow-covered garden. Audrey joined him, the baby asleep again. Silence settled comfortably between them, the kind that didn't demand filling. "I used to think moving on meant building something bigger," Thomas said at last. "Now I think I was just running." Audrey nodded. "I thought leaving meant losing everything. It turned out to be the beginning of finding myself." There was no dramatic reconciliation, no promises made in the frost. Only honesty, clean, simple, and brave. Thomas felt something loosen inside him, a weight he'd carried without realizing it had a name. For the first time, he understood that growth doesn't always look like addition. Sometimes it looks like release. And standing there, watching Audrey gently adjust the baby's blanket, Thomas knew this Christmas wasn't about proving anything. It was about learning how to begin again, with humility, with courage, and with a heart finally willing to listen. The day unfolded slowly as if time itself had decided to be gentle. Snow fell in quiet sheets, softening the edges of everything it touched. Thomas found himself moving through the house with a new awareness, noticing details he once overlooked. The way sunlight caught the ornaments, the way voices blended into warmth instead of noise. He watched Audrey laugh with his sister in the living room, the baby cradled between them, small fingers wrapped around nothing and everything at once. The child drew people in without effort, reminding Thomas how presence could be more powerful than words. Success had taught him how to command rooms, but this tiny life taught him how rooms could soften. Later, as the family gathered near the tree, Audrey handed the baby to Thomas without hesitation. The weight surprised him, not heavy yet profound. He held still, afraid to disrupt the moment, but the baby simply studied his face with wide curiosity. In those eyes, Thomas saw no judgment, no history, no expectations. Just possibility. Something broke open inside him. Not painfully but honestly. He realized how rarely he allowed himself to be needed without purpose, without return. This was different. This was simple. Audrey watched quietly, her expression unreadable but peaceful. She wasn't seeking approval or validation. She had already chosen her path. And for the first time, Thomas understood that respect didn't come from what he provided, but from how fully he showed up. When the baby was returned to Audrey's arms, Thomas felt a strange gratitude, for the moment, for the lesson, for the clarity. He didn't need to reclaim the past. He needed to grow beyond it. That afternoon, as laughter echoed through the house, Thomas made a quiet decision. He would stop measuring life by milestones and start measuring it by meaning. And that choice, more than any business deal he had ever closed, felt like the most important one he'd ever make. Christmas evening arrived without spectacle, yet it carried more truth than any celebration Thomas could remember. The house glowed with warmth, not from decorations, but from a shared sense of calm that felt earned. Conversations slowed. Laughter lingered. and Thomas felt present in a way he hadn't for years. As the family gathered for one last moment together, Audrey prepared to leave. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of how deeply she had already changed the course of several lives. Thomas walked them to the door, the cold air rushing in as it opened, sharp and cleansing. "Thank you for inviting me," Audrey said softly. "This meant more than you know." Thomas nodded, choosing honesty over pride. "I think I finally understand something I missed before." She smiled, not with nostalgia but with respect. That mattered more than any second chance ever could. After they left, Thomas stood alone in the quiet foyer. The house felt different now, not emptier but clearer. He realized that moving on wasn't about erasing the past or outperforming it. It was about learning from it without being chained to it. In the weeks that followed, Thomas changed in ways no one announced. He listened more. He canceled meetings that didn't matter. He showed up, to family, to moments, to himself. Not because he had lost something but because he had finally found perspective. The invitation he once sent to prove a point had become a turning point instead. A reminder that growth doesn't always come through triumph, but through humility and truth. And every Christmas after that, Thomas remembered this one, not as the night his past returned, but as the moment his future truly began.